Experience by Design, which you can check out here. And now we're recording, that's good. He's a professional speaker, and you can check out his topics and how to engage him there at garyconnects.com. And he's also a consultant, working with lots of organizations on the kinds of things that we'll talk about today. So a man of many strengths and skills, and it's a pleasure to hand it over to Gary. Take it away, sir.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Too many talents and skills, right? Am I right? No, a lot going on because there's a lot going on in this space and a lot of work that needs to be done. I appreciate the invitation from the Boston CXPA. I do remember the first time I was exposed to the Boston CXPA was at a coffee chat, actually, where I just wandered on down to Boston and was greeted by folks who were doing really interesting work. And I really found a home there and here. And it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to give something back in the form of this talk to a group that I feel has given me so much in terms of a academic orientation, a professional identity, and an outlet for sharing my work, along with numerous interesting conversations. So I really appreciate it. And a few things orient people to, very much use the chat box. Please feel free to liberally use the chat box to put in any comments, questions, insights, ideas, emojis, or anything else you feel moved to include. I actually do a lot of live streaming on Twitch. People are familiar with Twitch. I live stream content around education, sociology, and experience design. And so I'm very used to people being active participants in the chat box. So no reason to wait. Always feel free to use the chat box. Also, we do have a Google Doc that we'll be using throughout the keynote, and you should have the opportunity to feel free to use that. And so I've put the link into the chat, and you should be able to open up that Google Doc, and there'll be a few times we'll ask you questions to give some feedback around those questions. So we'll try that out and see if that technology works for us. So the first thing I want to start out with is this topic that everyone's been talking about, which is the Great Resignation. And for folks who are in the webinar, if you can put your hand up, right, in the chat box in the participant window, about to what extent have you experienced in your organization or in your life any contact with this Great Resignation? Sometimes it can be really easy to see things happening in the news, but it not happening in our lives. But I'm kind of curious, to what extent has the Great Resignation affected you and your organization? So if it has, feel free to use a green check mark or raise your hand, because it's good to get a sense of where people are in this space, around people leaving work, around people looking for other opportunities, and the reasons why they might be doing so. And as you are putting in your responses, we can sit here and think about question one that I have in the Google Doc. What have you observed at your organization or profession in terms of the Great Resignation? To what extent have you seen it impacting your ability to do work? Have you seen a lot of migration from your company? Has there been a challenge in terms of people being recruited in? Are people asking for more things in relation to their job opportunities that go beyond compensation, that might speak more closely to culture, that might speak more closely to employee experience? I teach a course at Bentley in our MBA program on employee experience. And I was just asked to actually teach, I usually teach it in the summer. I'm actually adding a fall course on employee experience. So this question of employee experience, this topic of employee experience is critical. Now for all of us, this is not news, right? We always talk about the best way to improve customer experience is to first improve employee experience. And the Great Resignation has a lot to do with this area of employee experience. And recently there was this quote, this Gallup research that was provided. It's not just the money that is driving the Great Resignation. There's more to it. And one of the findings from them was low engagement is specifically experienced when workers conclude they aren't growing, appreciated, or treated with care and respect. And this appreciated and growing piece, as well as being with care and respect, that becomes crucial to this idea of accepting employee gifts. This idea of looking at people in terms of what they bring to the organization and really valuing those contributions beyond job description, beyond just what they were hired for, to give them a chance to be themselves and to grow in their roles and as part of the organization in a more general sense. And that's the thing when we talk about accepting gifts that we want to focus in on. I see folks are typing stuff in, and we'll share this out, the document out after we're done as well. Whoops. There was this study that it just came out recently, and I gave the link at the bottom for the attribution of the source. And this four stage of a healthy organization. And the top two levels have a lot to do with making connections in the workplace. It's a holistic organization in which people feel connected to one another and the mission and purpose of the organization. Not just a transactional relationship, but a meaningful relationship. And so much of experience design, which is a course I teach at the graduate school and now at the undergraduate school as well, so much of experience design is about connecting things that matter to people in ways that they can recognize and resonate, so that they can see and that they can see it as a meaningful part of their experiences. And a lot of organizations just fail at that. They either don't think about it, or their efforts to do it, employee survey, aren't necessarily well aimed and well timed and don't deliver the results that they're hoping. And so this is going to be about how can we make breakthroughs in our work and in our thinking by making connections between parts of our organization, environments, and ideas that are disconnected. A lot of us suffer from disconnection. How do we become reconnected with ourselves, with our work, with the people we work with, and with the organizations we work for? And in the process of doing so, we all come out ahead, not just ahead in terms of the profit sheet, but that's good too, but also ahead in terms of the meaningful work that we are making. I created this 5-part framework called Connecting Disconnections that is made up of the following elements: assets, barriers, connectivity, deployment, and evaluation, or ABCDE, okay? And this is a 5-part framework that's part of a Keynote, a series that I deliver that I'm available for if anybody's interested, and also has separate elements that are part of my consulting deliveries. And the part that I want to focus on today is this first foundational piece, which is assets. How do we capture and appreciate the assets that people bring with them to the workplace as part of who they are? And the question here is really around gift giving and gift accepting, okay? I just came back from Salt Lake City, Utah, for a Society for Applied Anthropology conference. And one of the things that people have ever traveled around, and if you have children, you know that part of the anxiety of travel beyond catching COVID is finding something for your children, right? And not just finding anything. There's always part of travel that is, I gotta get something for the kids. I gotta bring something back. And the question of, will they like it? And as either you get older and have done this enough, or if you have enough kids, maybe the worry about that becomes less pronounced, and it's just, I just gotta get them something. You know, anything in the airport will do. But at the same time, you want to give them something that they are happy to receive. And it raises this question about what is the process of gift giving and gift accepting? So as another question, if you want to share, nothing too triggering, I hope, can you relate a time when your excitement to give a gift was not matched by the recipient? Perhaps you can think about a time when it was Christmas morning or Hanukkah or any other holiday where we spent so much time, so much effort planning ahead to find gifts that we think people will care for and appreciate, only to, it's like hyenas attacking a gazelle on the Serengeti, right? That the kids rip through all the presents, and at the end of it, they're looking at you going, is that it? Is there anything else? You got it. Where's the, but I really wanted that other thing. You know, maybe if they hunt around enough, they can find that other thing, and you're seeing they're going, didn't I do enough? Wasn't there enough already there? And that can be a really deflating experience, right? The fact that you put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of care, a lot of consideration into curating the list, and Amazon now makes it really easy to curate these lists with the wish list, and also makes it really, really easy for kids to populate those wish lists with everything. We're no longer going through the JCPenney catalog and circling things with a highlighter. We've advanced, but that also creates a greater burden on how to deal with all these requests, to the point where we can give these gifts and then not have them feel appreciated. That might not be as bad as this. I want to share this video of a gentleman seeking to give a gift and it not going as well as he hoped. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. This was on Australian television.
She's a good sort.
She is.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Talk about punching above your own weight.
Yeah, we've been together about 3 years now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to sort of go the next step. So
Which is?
asking her to be my wife.
I'll hold that for you, mate. Hang on, wait. All right. Big loud voice.
Catherine, will you make me the happiest man on earth and be my wife?
What are you doing? This isn't time. You can't do this like this.
Just say yes. Say yes. And we'll just,
That hasn't gone that well. No.
I told my mum to record it. I'll call Dad, make sure he doesn't record it.
That hasn't gone that well is perhaps one of the great understatements in history. And I love the video of the Keynote wheel behind him. Perhaps not what she had envisioned in terms of a romantic opportunity to be engaged. I don't know what people think about growing up, about what will it be like when I finally get engaged, when the love of my life asks me to marry him. And I did not imagine it would be in front of a Keynote wheel on Australian national television. And the guy now going into calling his dad because his dad was going to record it. And so we can imagine what the experience of having gifts that we have given not being appreciated. Hopefully for everybody in the audience today, not that bad. Hopefully it wasn't something as significant as what this gentleman experienced. And if you go on YouTube, which I did for this talk, you can find all kinds of examples of people proposing in public and having it not go very well, which I think the moral to the story is never propose in public with people having cameras on you, just in case. When I proposed, it was camping out in the woods. So it would have been a long car ride home, but at least no one was there to record it. But we've all probably had the experience, as someone said, yes, it's called Christmas in the Google Doc. So feel free to commiserate in the Google Doc about times where we have tried to give gifts, but those gifts didn't go as well as we had wanted. That for some reason, they weren't appreciated and how deflated. I came back with a sweatshirt for my daughter from Salt Lake City. I said, yeah, first, she didn't say, great to have you home, Dad. We missed you. How was your trip? She said, what did you bring me? And I gave her the sweatshirt and she grabbed it, looked at it, made no reaction, and then walked away. So there was my share with the group today. It feels a little bit like a support group right now, but we've all had that kind of experience. And when our gifts, especially in the form of our talents and abilities, are not accepted, then we can feel detached and disengaged from the relationship. And it shouldn't be that hard to think about the relationship with our companies, with our employer, with our manager, with our coworkers. We might have all been in meetings where we've tried to give an idea. We've tried to volunteer something where we're willing to do. We've tried to contribute in a way we thought was meaningful, only to be shut down or not acknowledged. It doesn't mean that all of our ideas have to be taken up. It doesn't mean that all of our contributions have to be accepted, but it does mean that our attempts to do so should be recognized and appreciated, and how disengaged we can become when we feel like there's no one there to accept what we're trying to give them. And it turns out gift giving is a key part of community building as well. There's a great book, and I was fortunate enough in a previous life, back when I was living in Detroit, I was working at United Way Community Services while I was doing my PhD program, and I had the opportunity to go to this workshop called the Assets-Based Community Development Workshop. And this was done in Memphis, Tennessee. I'll never forget it, even though it was, over 22 years now. And assets-based community development and the Assets-Based Community Development Institute is this effort that was developed in Chicago. It's located at Northwestern University. And this book over here, a big workbook called Building Communities from the Inside Out, was originally published in 1993. So not necessarily a new idea, but a really important idea, and one that really has not necessarily been adopted as much as it should be. And the focus of this work and the focus of this book is not on what is missing in a community, but rather what gifts a community already possesses. To what extent can we bring gifts as the central part of the building process in the community? What does this mean? Well, let's look at John Kratzman, who John Kratzman was one of the authors. I took the workshop with John McKnight, who I actually brought to Bentley to give a talk when I started working there. And this quote from 1997, communities can only be built by focusing on the strengths and capacities of the citizens who call that community home. The strengths and capacities of the citizens, what they can do, the assets and gifts they bring. Those who have escaped the lures of deficiency, therefore, have been drawing up a new map based on old truths, an assets map. At the center of the map and of the community building process lie the gifts of individual residents, their knowledge, skills, resources, values, and commitments. I do a lot of work, I do a lot of talking on what I call building workplace communities. And that can include building virtual workplace communities. I am a sociologist at heart. And I have worked with community organizations. I have worked in community service organizations. And I care about bringing people together. It's what's always driven my work from when I was a PhD student. How do we connect people together? How do we get them in touch with each other? Because together we can do the greatest good and the greatest work. And one of the key pieces of building community, whether in a physical neighborhood community or in an organization, is by putting gifts at the center of it. What people can do, the knowledge, skills, resources, values, commitments they bring. That is the core element. Now, traditionally, communities, especially quote unquote underprivileged communities, have been approached from a needs-based model. Unemployment, truancy, broken families, slum housing, crime, welfare, dropouts, gangs, illiteracy, all of these social problems. That's a needs-based model. What are we missing? What are the issues that we're facing? What are the barriers? Where are the challenges? An assets model looks like this. What are the resources we already have with us, in us, that we can recognize and leverage? The gifts of individuals, the gifts of citizens associations, the gifts of local institutions. And how do we connect those things together? One might look at this assets-based model and also see a stakeholder model. Community stakeholders that can be connected together in new and unique ways to really let us know what building blocks we have available. And in the Assets-Based Community Development Institute, there's a lot of examples from communities. One such example is from Minneapolis, Minnesota, actually, in a predominantly Hispanic community in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which was seen as, underprivileged, underserved, high unemployment, high drug use, high crime rate, high vice, drug use, prostitution, things like that. And a lot of organizations went in there and said, oh, look how downtrodden this community is. These folks and the community leaders came in and had a different approach. They began with a community talent inventory. And from that inventory, they were, number one, able to identify the entrepreneurial skills within the community, the things that people could already do. And number two, they began to build relationships among community members, connect those disconnections to bring people together in meaningful ways. And through this process of working with community institutions, local agencies, and individuals, they opened up something called Mercado Central. Opened in 1997, it was home or is home to over 35 businesses from the community. One of the key parts of community development is keeping money circulating within the community. If there's development that comes in from the outside, that money can then leave And while the community might benefit from some jobs, which is good, nothing wrong with that, they don't benefit completely from that economic development because there's not money internal to it. And so by having businesses from within the community, hiring people from within the community, bringing people down to the community to go shopping, in the first year, 1997, it generated over $2 million in sales. Now, again, for some of your organizations, this might be a good week, okay? But for this community that was identified as having nothing happening or only bad things happening, this resulted in a pretty impressive turnaround and also a point of pride, because this is something that was from them, of them, and was meaningful to them. And that's a really key part of this process, is the meaning to them. Now, interesting thing about this, and I'll take a second and look at some of the thoughts or questions that people might have in the chat. No one's applied this model to businesses, except for me. This is what I call the ABCDE, assets-based community development for the enterprise. How might we, using design thinking language, how might we take this assets-based model and use it to build communities in organizations, to accept gifts that people bring, to create stronger communities in the organizations that serves as the starting point for delivering better experiences for everybody involved, right? And this is one of the key parts of this program, is that connection of employee experience to customer experience. I see Becky, knowledge, skills, resources. How do you see EX needs connect to and impact the CX customer experience? And I do have a case that I worked on with an organization in their contact center that I'll get to. But I think we can all understand the potential import of accepting the skills, the knowledge, the competencies, the capabilities of people in our organizations as a key part to delivering better experiences for our customers, for our clients, for our employees, and for anybody else that might exist in our experience ecosystem. I teach a course on experience design in which I talk about the experience ecosystem. It's that larger conglomeration of experience channels that we need to think about. Very often, customer experience is siloed from employee experience, from user experience, from digital, brand, et cetera, from product experience design. All of these things are siloed from each other, and often they can work against each other. UX might work against CX. The job of UX from the organization might be to create addictive technologies, or to make it more difficult to people to leave their subscription, or to have a colored button that people are more likely to click, not because they want the product, but because it's psychologically stimulating. That's not necessarily customer experience. It might lead to more sales, but does that lead to a better experience for the customer? Does that lead to a better experience for the employee? Not necessarily, if they came in hoping to do some greater good, make a lot of people's lives better through design, which a lot of us want to do. And now they're faced with this conundrum of not improving through design, but increasing profit through design. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, but we can often find that they're working against each other. So how can we connect people together in ways that deliver on the greater promise of experience design? Sarah said, I'm looking at this ABCDE as a great way to get the work of our DEI Council integrated into our culture, to start to make a shift towards a more inclusive culture. Yes, absolutely, Sarah. And I should mention that at Bentley University, I was part of a 3-person team that created the first DEI major in the country. And when I say DEI major, it's a major to train DEI professionals to work in communities and organizations. So Sarah, happy to chat with you about that in terms of how you can use this approach, and absolutely to create what I call more inclusive diversity and inclusion. It's one of the areas I speak about and do consulting on. Inclusive diversity and inclusion by accepting the gifts that people bring with them.
That reminds me, Gary, that comment, it applies just as well to customer experience initiatives, right? Where like if just with a DEI council or something like that, that is volunteer based, customer experience programs often start, or customer experience transformations often start with building a coalition of the willing and building champions networks that are volunteer based and so forth. So I can totally see how that same thinking applies directly to the CX world too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. Absolutely. And one of the things I find as a sociologist, and as I'm chatting about this in the Google Doc, if you want to, you can think about what are the biggest assets in your organization in terms of individuals, groups, demographics, attitudes, the physical environment, the surrounding community in which the organization exists, supply chains and other partners. Feel free to share in the Google Doc. We'd love to see your comments. You know, the passion and the motivation that drives people to volunteer for these kinds of efforts is perhaps one of the greatest keys to success, because people are giving of their time and of themselves and are very often looking to extend what they're capable of doing in the workplace. ERGs, employee resource groups, can be a tremendous resource of this kind of activity, because people are sharing their passion with one another. One of the biggest challenges I think about working virtually is not necessarily the fact that we're working virtually. We can manage that. It's the fact that we might lose touch with parts of each other that we express in the workplace that let others into our worlds. What do I mean by that? Well, I can get a lot out of looking at your cubicle. I can get a lot out of conversations we're having about your weekend. I can get a lot out of what you're sharing about how your day went, or what's coming up in the future, what your kids are doing, what hobbies you took up. Those are all assets. Those are all competencies. Those are all skills. But if we're just online, we can lose that kind of connective tissue that allows us into each other's worlds. And so one of the challenges of online work is not just not being around each other. Frankly, depending on where you work, you might find that a benefit, but it's knowing each other at a way beyond the workplace. And so when we're talking about capabilities here, it's not just about capabilities related to your job description. It's just about capabilities, competencies, skills, aspirations that you have in general. And so those are all really important things to think about when we're thinking about assets. And a needs-based model for an organization might look like this. What skills is the organization missing? What are the error or defect rates in production? How many staff are needed, or how many people are we missing? To what extent are employees not engaged? What consulting areas do we need to bring in? And I know some of us are consultants, nothing wrong with being a consultant, but often consultants are brought in, hopefully for a fresh perspective, but as a way of identifying deficiency. I'll just speak for myself, and I know this is being recorded. It's okay, I have tenure. They can't fire me. I know at my school, it's always interesting to see people from the outside brought in to do things that faculty know how to do. A survey, an evaluation, a design, people coming in to tell us how to teach, right? Or innovation in teaching. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're bringing in people from the outside without first tapping into the knowledge base of your people that you already have, you're going to have folks that are going to feel jaded and disconnected. I know I do. If they brought someone in from the outside to come to Bentley to talk about educational live streaming on Twitch, I would go, I'm right here. Or if they said, how to start a podcast, and they brought someone else in, I would say, I'm right here. I do this. Why didn't you ask me? And I wonder how many of us in this talk today have been in a situation where you've said to yourself, why didn't they ask me? And it's that why didn't they ask me moment that creates that disengagement. Well, we need to start asking, and we might not know what people are capable of. So an assets-based model in an organization might look like, what types of clubs and associations do people belong to? What types of hobbies do people have? What kinds of interests or learning aspirations do people have? What do they want to learn? I see Carl just agreed with me in chat, which makes Carl very smart, which we've all known how smart Carl is. But what if, I know Carl plays guitar. I know Carl's a musician. What if people in the organization, you had people who wanted to learn guitar, wanted to learn how to play music. And Carl said, yeah, I'd love to, stay after work or at lunchtime, teach people how to play guitar. So yeah, have people bring in guitars. Hey, maybe the organization can go out and get some used guitars and just have them in the office place. And, if you're interested in learning some guitar, we have some guitars available, just sign up and we're going to use, get some used guitars. Carl has a lot of guitars. He can just bring his. It's totally fine. Right, Carl? Why not? Why not do something like that? Forrester does have guitars in their lobby. So everyone just meet at Forrester. Well, let's go over there and we'll play guitar. But why not? How might we create greater engagement around people's interests and aspirations to create those connections? What in Zappos they called collisions, right? How do we create collisions from different parts of the organization? What kinds of accomplishments do people have outside of work? What are the physical spaces we have? Can we make those physical spaces available to people in the community to connect our assets with their needs? What community environment exists around the company environment? So these are just another way of thinking about assets from in an organizational model versus the needs that people might have. So if one was to start with an assets-based community development for the enterprise initiative or any kind of initiative around assets-based community development, the ABCD Institute says these are some primary questions to think about. What's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to make greater connections in the workplace? Just having people coming back to the office doesn't make them feel more connected. Just as being in the same family with somebody doesn't make you feel connected to your relatives. We all know. So the proximity does not equal connection. And we can be connected and be really far away from each other. So what are we hoping to achieve in all of this? What specific goals can we name that will help make the general goal more concrete? How might we improve customer experience through the skills, knowledge, capabilities, and assets that our employees already have? We won't know until we inventory what those are. And then that's why in my framework, assets, then barriers. How might we creatively connect the assets we have to overcome the barriers that exist through having increased connectivity, which allows us to deploy better designs, which we can then evaluate for their impact. But assets is the first part of that puzzle. What kinds of questions need to be asked in order to generate the kind of information necessary to meet both the general and specific goals? So when we're designing this kind of instrument or doing interviews or focus groups or touch point conversations, making it part of a quarterly or annual review, rather than going over what someone did as part of their job, go over who they are as a person and use that as an opportunity to collect that information. And how will the information that we collect accomplish our goals? A really, really critical part. Rich is asking, how important is leadership in optimizing the assets-based approach to connectivity? It's important, Rich, but I also think that it's, people talk about top down or bottom up. I also think about it from middle out. So, middle management and then making change happen from that middle in both directions. I think that leadership matters, but I also think initiative matters more. And I think that these are things that you could do as a manager, as a project lead, right? Because it costs no resources, right? Doesn't take, that much more time, doesn't cost any money. And it starts to integrate as part of an employee experience initiative. So leadership matters, but initiative, I think, matters more. Who ultimately is accountable within an enterprise to adopt an assets-based model? That depends. And that's, whenever I say that depends, everyone drinks, because I teach my sociology class, it's always, it depends. It could be HR. It could be experience design. It could be employee experience. It could be a DEI community. It could be customer experience. And I do think, as a person who situates himself as an experience designer, that there is this need to have a larger umbrella of experience design to integrate, another keynote for another time, but to integrate all of these different experience elements for sure. So we might create an assets inventory. And this is just me mocking up one really quickly. And if you go to the ABCDI Institute or ABCD Institute, they have examples. They're all from a community perspective. I'm the only one who's creating them that I know of from an organizational perspective. But when creating a skills and assets inventory, you'd want to think about these following dimensions: individuals, organization, physical, assets, community assets, supply chain. And then start to do the work of inventory and of mapping these things out. Maybe it is Post-it notes, right? Maybe you just put a sheet out there and let people on their own map out what they think the assets of the organization are on a big white piece of paper, right? And you use that as a way. There's a lot of ways of doing this that make it fun and less time intensive than just doing a survey, like an employee engagement tool, employee assessment tool. Real quick, just to kind of give you an example of what this might look like. This came from a project I did with Megan Burns, with a client that we were working with another individual in a call center, a contact center. They were receiving customer calls. So it was an inbound call center from customers around a product that was being created. It was a dental lab, a very large dental lab. And one of the issues they had in this dental lab was their, not surprisingly, customer experience and their scores. And they wanted to look at increasing their scores. I took a look at what they were doing, and it was all very much on a standardized model. That one of the things that the call center workers had to do at the end of the phone call was ask the customer, is there anything else I can help you with today? Even if they didn't help the customer with the first thing they called for, which is never a good idea. As a customer, you never want to be asked, is there anything else I can help you with when you didn't help me with the first thing? And then you would ask, I asked the workers, well, why did you ask that question then? And they said, because we had to. We were evaluated on it. And there were a lot of other issues with how the call center was being run, not because the managers were bad, but because a consultant told them how to manage the call center a particular kind of way. And so what I was asked to do along with Megan was to redesign the call center training program. And so I created this conscious conversations and deliberate dialogue framework. And rather than look at what they weren't doing, I listened to the phone calls using my conversation analytic training, and I identified the skills and competencies that the workers were already displaying. Show me the best people you have and let me learn from what it is they're doing. That's what I always do. I always look for the people who are doing a good job. And I listened to phone calls and I analyzed them and I broke down what they were doing well and I interviewed the workers about what they were doing. And I said, did you know how smart your people are? They're really good. Oh, by the way, here's the different ways that they handle challenging situations and problematic customers. And so we developed a training program that was identifying the internal competencies, strategies, and abilities of the customer service representatives and technical assistants. We made those skills explicit, and we created a knowledge sharing framework and training program. I added a little bit from the outside, but most of what we put forward was, here's how you can identify what your people are already doing well. Rather than having your managers evaluate what was missing from your phone calls, let's train them to evaluate what people are doing positively. And how do we pull that back in and share it with the group? Very different than a punitive needs-based model of what you didn't do well, much more of a assets-based, here's what you did well, and here's how we can learn from each other. And it reminds me of this quote from The Customer Comes Second. Happiness in the workplace is a strategic advantage. Service comes from the heart, and people who feel cared for will care more. When we went to the people who were doing well, which all of them were doing well in their own way, they felt cared for, they felt appreciated, they felt acknowledged. And key parts of employee experience are appreciation, acknowledgement, acceptance, right? Not just compensation, but these other areas as well. And by identifying the assets, skills, competencies that people had in the call center, contact center, we were able to leverage that to hopefully improve the customer experience as well. If folks we want to leave some time for questions and answers. I know people have been putting questions into the chat and I want to get those, but there are on my website, ethnoanalytics.com, white papers. The ethnographic interviewing for competency capture, there's a white paper there on how to do that. And also about the conscious conversation and deliberate dialogue program for contact centers. There's a white paper there as well. If folks want to read more about those things, you can go to that URL and you can download those papers. And if you have any questions, you want to talk to me more about any of these things, by all means, you can just feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to talk about it. And again, this is all about this connecting disconnections framework where assets is the core piece. And if folks are interested in hearing more about the entire framework, I might be doing a project with an organization here in Boston just around evaluation, participatory design and evaluation, to connect the evaluation with the stakeholders in their experience ecosystem, to bring all the pieces together to form a tighter community and a more meaningful experience. You can find out more from GaryConnects.com and reach out to me there as well. Happy to chat about it.
That's terrific. Thank you, Gary. That was super interesting. I love that last story. I mean, that tied it all together and put a bow on it, which I wasn't even looking at this slide when I thought of saying exactly that. So good, no pun intended in that comment. Folks, if you have any additional questions or thoughts that you want to run by Gary here, please feel free to put those into the chat or to share more in the Google Doc while you're thinking of those final questions. Gary, one thought that came to mind as you were going through the story there about the dental lab, I would venture a guess that in addition, the approach that you took, in addition to giving you the best ideas that were going to work well in that environment, right? Because they were already working.
Right.
I imagine employees received the training program and the recommendations in a very different way, knowing that they came from the organization and from them or their peers, versus if it was a standard customer service training or something
Right.
that a consultant had sort of pulled out of thin air. Did you find that to be true?
Yeah, I did. And, it's not surprising, right? I mean, I've been accused of doing sociology of the obvious before, which I'm guilty of. But then my question is, if it's so obvious, how come it's so hard to do? Because we get, especially think about evaluation having a negative connotation. Even as professors, we often get trapped into grading papers in terms of what people didn't do right or well and not acknowledging when they do something well. Or as my parents used to tell me, if I didn't correct you, it means you're doing it okay. Well, I need a little bit more than that, which is why I'm in therapy. But I need a little bit more. I need a little positive reinforcement too. That might be nice. So they of course received it well, right? And they felt empowered. I should also say that I added some things in that weren't from the organization. A great book was called Verbal Judo, is from policing, law enforcement, how to deal with difficult people. And so we kind of combined some things from other professions that were proven, but the biggest thing was we allowed people to be experts. We allowed them to have flexibility. We didn't standardize their interactions. We acknowledged them as competent practitioners, not just interchangeable parts that are following a script. And I even had them analyze their own calls. One of the things I did was I videotaped them analyzing their own calls and letting me know and each other know why they were doing the things that they were doing in the calls. And this created a tremendous knowledge sharing opportunity. And so the opportunity to have collective analytics, right, to come together to examine what's going on and then to capture those things, make them explicit, put them back in the training program as this is you, this is who we are, and this is how we do this well. Much easier to integrate than something that is coming from outside the organization.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. One question that I don't think we got to before from Phyllis, which is a good one, is there some line that we should be aware of with respect to privacy and personal information as we're trying to do this
Right.
assets inventory at the beginning. Any thoughts or experience around that would be helpful to the audience, do you think?
I think it's always voluntary. I am a social scientist, so I do follow human subjects ethical guidelines. And there's, voluntariness, there's anonymity and confidentiality. And it doesn't mean that you have to go into someone's background. If someone doesn't want to share their political affiliation, what religious institution they go to, what their browser history is, it's totally fine. We're only looking for certain things that they want to share, right? And it might be, I run marathons, or I like to knit, or anything like that. And it might just be, what hobbies do you engage in outside of the workplace? And you can get a feel for things based on the culture of your organization. So I think privacy is always an important consideration. And we want to acknowledge that and not feel like we're digging into people's lives for any kind of punitive ways. But if people believe that's the purpose, then there's bigger problems, perhaps in the organization as well, as to how that information might be used. I think it's a great question. And I think, this is a, design to fit your situation rather than this is the way you have to do it.
Sure. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Well, terrific. Thank you, Gary. That was super valuable, and the connection to CX is really clear in my mind, at least. And that last story just wrapped it up really neatly, I thought, as I said before. So with that, why don't we wrap up, and we'll let folks get on with their days a bit earlier than scheduled, which is always nice. Thank you again, Gary, for your time and your contribution here. Super valuable as always. Thanks to everyone who joined the session, for joining and for actively participating. That makes a big difference. Event materials will be available after the event, so they'll be sent out to folks. There is a survey link in the Zoom chat right now. Once the Zoom is over, it will be gone. So please do provide your feedback on the event today by clicking on that link and filling out a short questionnaire. And as I mentioned before, at the beginning of the session, our next Boston CXPA event will be Tuesday the 3rd. That's May 3rd, Tuesday, May 3rd, from 12 to 1 Eastern Time, with Greg Kilstrom, author of Meaningful Measurements of the Customer Experience. More information will be shared on that event, and registration details and so forth coming soon. All right, so with that, I think we will say thank you again to all, and have a great afternoon or a great day.
Thanks, everybody. And any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Always happy to chat about this stuff. It is a passion of mine. And the more we can make people connected with one another, the more we can get them engaged with one another, and the more we appreciate one another, the better off we'll all be as a community and a society. So thank you very much.
Hear, hear. Take care, all.
Bye.